You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is January 29th, 2025, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today, our show is just going to focus mostly on Trump's first steps out of the box. Last week, we talked about his inauguration speech and what he's going to do. Usually it takes about a month for most presidents to get something done, but this president did all kinds of things in week one. So we're going to talk about some of that because it's if you blink, you're going to miss it. It's going that fast. But before we get into any of the topics in the show, let me introduce you to our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. My name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So we always start out with a Liberty quote of the day. And this time it seemed particularly appropriate because the theme of so much of what Trump seems to be doing is taking some whacks at government here and there. So, and like I said, we're going to talk about a whole list of things he did in week one. But the guy at the center of that is Elon Musk. And he had a quote that I thought was kind of interesting that he said during the pandemic, before he sort of became associated with Republicans back when Democrats thought he was one of them. And his company had been on lockdowns. And he didn't think that was cool because he had a Tesla factory here in California and needed to get stuff up and running. And California, in fact, he had a back and forth with, I think her name was Gonzalez or Gomez or one of the state representatives here, and that was of his district, and she said some kind of nasty words to Elon in a tweet because he wanted to open up, and there was talk about Elon moving to Texas and everything else. Well, anyways, Elon essentially said that, hey, look, if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff. Okay. And this one, I thought it was such a good quote. And he said this on the Joe Rogan show during the lockdowns. And so we actually have a video of this quote because I felt like you need to hear him in his own words saying that. Half the time, the quotes are so old, we don't even have video of them anyways. But this one we do have. And so let's hear Elon in his own words. So James, our invisible hand, can you bring up KOL 1?
This notion, though, that you can just sort of send checks out to everybody and things will be fine is not true. Obviously, there's some people have this absurd view that the economy is like some magic horn of plenty, like it just makes stuff, whatever. It just there's a magic horn of plenty, and the goods and services they just come from this magic horn of plenty. And then if somebody has more stuff than somebody else, it's because they took more from this magic horn of plenty. Now let me just break it to the fools out there. If you don't make stuff, there's no stuff.
So there you go. That's for all the fools out there. And I thought that was particularly appropriate for lockdowns because I was not a fan of lockdowns either. And it seemed like the world thought that you could just send checks out to everybody and nobody had to do anything, which is nuts. So anyways, what do you guys think about this? This is, by the way, the head of Trump's DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency now. So, and he's also happens to be one of the richest people in the world, sort of a free speech advocate in his purchase of Twitter, and, also one of the world's most foremost tech moguls as well. What do you guys think about all this?
Well, since I don't consider myself a fool, maybe a knucklehead, but not a fool, then I don't have to have that explained to me because I fully understand the concept. If you don't make, if somebody doesn't make stuff or provide services, it ain't there. Okay, folks. So yeah, I get it.
I think Elon's statement there is deeper than just the mere words. It's the representation of socialism versus a free enterprise system. And in the socialist system, we just take it from people and send checks out until we run out of other people's money, and then the system will collapse. But in a free enterprise system where there's competition, people are making stuff, so there will be stuff. And of course, on all our lives will be better. When you think about making stuff, people are employed, they are paying taxes, and those taxes can be used by the government. Hopefully, they'll use it in an efficient way, which obviously is not the case. But the whole idea is that, where did Tim go?
I don't know. Go ahead.
I'm going to listen, but I'm going to change my position because I'm a little uncomfortable. So I'm going to go to a different room. So I'm going to shut off the cam, and you keep talking, Leon.
Okay.
I'm
So
listening.
the whole idea is that it is a very succinct representation of Marxist socialism versus the free enterprise capitalist system.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. Boy, it seems like we're getting some choppy audio now. Hopefully, Tim doesn't have this thing. James, maybe you could mute Tim for us if you can, so just in case there's something going on there. But yeah. So, anyways, this is yeah, clearly an explanation, Leon, for those who didn't get the obvious. and that's the problem, right? I mean, this is what's so crazy. This shouldn't be an extraordinary statement of Elon Musk. And maybe you could bring that statement back up, James, too, just so people can see it again. Because it's really simple. I mean, if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff, right?
There's no stuff.
and I mean, can you believe that was profound,
Yes.
during lockdowns, that so many people had lost sight of this, that, people thought you could literally just write checks and keep everybody locked down and that stuff would magically show up. So,
Right, exactly.
This is,
Exactly.
just absolutely nuts. So anyways, yeah, so, but it's good to see that, somebody with that sense is now looking at the government with his eye on efficiency and ways that he can kind of cut things, I guess, that aren't working out. So we're going to get into some of that now.
Even though I must admit it's somewhat ironic, or even this kind of oxymoronic, I guess, to say you're going to expand government to shrink government, to create more efficiency in government. You're going to expand it because this is a whole new department, even though Elon and Trump have claimed it is going to have a short life. It's no more than 2 years or something like that. But it's still kind of ironic to see the expansion of government to shrink the government.
Yeah. Well, and we'll certainly talk about some of that as we go in, but it's funny. I mean, just some of this is loosely tied to Doge, but it just seems like everything is about efficiency as he comes into office. And so one of the first things I wanted to bring up, and this is a story that from I guess it's a website called the govexec.com, and it said Trump wants to 10 regulations eliminated for each new one issued. So this is kind of the thinking of the Trump administration that, you're going to go in there and, it's possible government is needed in some areas, but there's probably a whole lot of things that, either aren't necessary or maybe were necessary at one point and just need to be off the books at this point. And, one thing I guess that he may be looking at a little bit in this, and Leon shared me with the other night, but apparently Arizona has a sunset law, and that could be an example, I guess, of how maybe some of this would get done, that maybe you would have a way that some of these laws could exit off the books. So it certainly seems like a very liberty-oriented plan, a way to practically reduce government. Because, this is one of the things that I've always found troubling, is that the incentives inside a government for a government worker, a person who is creating new regulation, is always to create regulation, right? I mean, if you're
Exactly.
a regulator, that's what you do. So the idea is that, you get your cred from all of the regulation you create, but you don't really get much cred for removing regulations, right? As
Right.
that government employee.
Yeah.
And so this kind of tries to push some of that in there so that, it's not just going to be about adding endlessly without ever removing anything. Anyways, just curious to hear what you guys' thoughts are on this. Do you guys think this is practical, that it could work, or are you guys, skeptical?
No, I am not really skeptical. I will go back to the Arizona model, where after a while there's sunset to legislation, I think this kind of thing should be embedded in our constitution in some manner or the other. That after a while, laws and all the associated regulations should die. Okay, these laws, these regulations, they have a sunshine date, a date of effect, but they never have, very few of them have sunset dates. And I think this should be in our constitution because just like you just said, Jason, the incentive within the bureaucracy is to continue to propagate more and more regulation, greater growth in government. And the only way to stop that is to put a sunset, um, a sunset date in place on all of these legislations. And I would have liked to see this throughout the country on all legislation, anything that has the force of law, we should have a sunset date on those laws and all the associated regulation. If these are so good and they are so wonderful and working so well, then let them pass it again. Let them go through the process and pass it again. There should be no problem with that. Instead of these things, we have things on the books right now that are 100, 200 years old. Well, I don't know if 200 years, but certainly 100 years old that are still on the books. Why? I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I would like to see this be part of the efficiency that Trump would bring into government, where more laws, if not all laws, have sunset dates.
Well, what about the regulation that pilots have to fly west on headings that are in the westerly, I'm sorry, even altitudes on headings that are westerly, and odd altitudes on headings that are easterly? This has been around a long, long time. Is it time to just toss it out, and then what do we do in the meanwhile? Do we just, it's free for all? I mean, what about that regulation? That's been around a long time.
Well, if this is an important piece of regulation, there must be some senator, some congressperson who is aware of the necessity of it and let them work on it and repass it. I see no reason why. Well, we have laws against murder for that matter.
Yeah,
We're
should
not
we
going to
put
just we're just not just going to sit around and let them let well the law against murder well it expired, so now everybody could go out and kill each other. I don't
Yeah.
think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And this law, the thing that you're talking about the issue about pilots, and even on odd and all these sort of things, flying heights and all that. Fine. I mean, somebody's going to be aware of it, and somebody's going to push it, and somebody's going to say, if the law is about us to sunset, we need to do something about it. It becomes an issue, and then, of course, something will be done.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want people running into each other on, flying here, there, and everywhere. So it's just for the orderly movement of planes without running into each other for the most part. And the same thing with murder. It's just, that's, I don't think they want to sunset that one. That's just my point.
No, I don't think they want to sunset it, but they should have to repass those laws.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I think that's a lot of work, on stuff that you just ought to leave alone. I mean, if it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So,
Why?
It's a what?
Why?
Well, for one thing, if you're trying to reduce the cost of government, and the cost of government now is just well beyond its ability to fund itself. So if you want to do that, I think you need to be looking at the workings and machinations of the governments itself, not necessarily the regulations that they put on people. Now, yes, do regulations slow economic growth and economic activity? Yes, and so many of these regulations could and should be sunsetted or repealed or whatever. But that's a different thing. I mean, if you're looking for government efficiency, in other words, not costing as much, I don't think the regulations you put on average Americans is part of the problem. there is a big part of the problem. The big part of the problem is spending on all these programs and things like that. That's different from regulations. At least my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Well,
The regulations come from the laws. Go ahead, Jason. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. So I guess just a quick breakdown. So I mean, you have essentially, you have your constitution, and you have which lays out the order of your government, and then you have your lawmaking body, which is your legislature, and they're making statute, and then you have the executive office that is making regulations to execute the statute.
Right.
So to put a lot of detail to that, and so that's kind of like the tiers of your authority, I guess, in lawmaking. And so the weakest are the regulations. But that said, so when you get to these regulations, I mean, yes and no. I mean, there's some regulations that I guess need to be there to execute some of the statutes. Like Tim is saying, I mean, I don't know that we'd want to necessarily pull something even for a day was telling the planes if there's a way that's managing those planes in the commons. But then again, I mean, do we really need all of these, say, drug laws, all of these different regulations that are executing those things, to so many different degrees? I mean, there's an awful lot of things we do that are just purely invasive into people's liberty. So I mean, I like the spirit of what they're trying, but you do have this issue that, and this is, I think, one of the things we're going to see in some of these stories, that just saying things that sound good, there may be a little bit of detail that needs to be fleshed out in some of these stories, and so that I think what we just saw between Tim and Leon is exactly, I think, what Trump is going to experience in some of these early days here, and we'll see that in one of the stories. In fact, I might just jump to that story right off the bat because this really does get to one of the issues. And let me see here. So it's James, maybe you could bring up the visual. So Trump wound up, one of the very first things he did is he fired about 20, I believe, general inspectors. So the way we talked about this a few shows back, where we were talking about the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And one of the points I made was in the show was that, look, you got this new DOGE that's supposed to be looking out for government efficiency. Well, that's what inspector generals to some degree were supposed to be doing, looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And clearly they're not doing that great of a job, right? If we think we need this DOGE, clearly those 70 inspector generals really aren't, I guess, doing exactly what we're hoping they were going to do in all of these different agencies that they're out, because there isn't one broad inspector general like what they're trying to do with DOGE. It was simply all these different agencies had an inspector general essentially
Right.
within them that was trying to look for these things, and it was supposed to be a relatively independent thing. Well, that was one of the things Trump ran into, because he immediately came in and said, well, why don't we just get rid of a bunch of these guys? And well, there was an actual statute that said you can't just get rid of them. And so now Trump may have run into some issues there. James, we have KOL 6, so we're going out of order here, but maybe you could play that video here, because this is a discussion with one of the inspector generals who was fired, and he's giving one of the things that Trump, I guess, did wrong here. So let's hear that.
So then what is the problem, the concern about what happened?
So the concern is twofold. One, on a technical basis, under the Inspector General Act, any president may remove an Inspector General, but has to do so with notice to Congress. So 30 days before the removal, the president has to notify Congress and provide substantive rationale about that individual Inspector General and identify the reasons for the removal. So this is not a cursory sort of statement. This is an important part of it. It's not a technicality. This is an important element because it gives the Congress the opportunity to weigh in and ensure that there's not political retribution going on or some sort of inappropriate motivation there. And so that's the key here is that failure to notify and provide Congress an opportunity to weigh in. That's an important principle. It's an important protection of the independence of inspectors general.
Are you getting...
So that was kind of a little bit of a discussion that there was supposed to be a 30 days notice and a chance for Congress to look at it. There's a lot of people who are saying, well, this isn't really that important, but it is kind of interesting that this is literally what the statute of the law that provides for the inspector generals, and it's just being ignored. So, which is part of what an inspector general is supposed to look at. People aren't following the law within organizations, and so, anyways, I just wanted to bring that up because this is kind of an issue here.
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, I was curious.
And it's a separation of powers stuff right there. Separation of powers. You don't have a single king that just, he can lop off the heads of whoever he wants. No, now you've got, or at least here, we're supposed to have, three different branches to checks and balances. And here, Trump is doing what Trump loves to do: be king. He's king, King Trump.
I think, Tim, I think you guys really reading this whole separation of powers wrong in this case, okay?
Okay.
Trump is the head of the executive branch of government. With that comes a certain amount of authority and the ability to bring people into government and also to kick them out of government. There may be a little thing about the 30-day notice and all that kind of stuff, which Trump will probably have to clean up. I might agree with that. Even that I am not sure is constitutional because he is the head of the executive branch of government. And all this crap about, they didn't give Congress notice and all that kind of stuff and things like that. I don't think the head of the executive branch of government, which is the president of the United States, have to give Congress notice when he's going to fire somebody. And I don't think he should be. He should have to do that, quite frankly.
Well, apparently the law says different. I mean, if you're law abiding, like he says he is, if you're all about, making sure everybody obeys the laws, he's not obeying that law. Is that it?
Well, I am saying I am not sure that the law is constitutional.
Okay, well, constitutional lawyer is going to have to answer that one, not me.
Well, yeah, I'm a constitutional lawyer, and I play one on TV.
Yeah, okay.
And by the way, that is where that conversation on Newsmax eventually went to, that, well, maybe this will have to be addressed by the courts. But, it is interesting, though, that this is one of the things I hadn't really thought about too much when I was thinking about those inspector generals. When we talked about it before, I was thinking about, the efficiency issues and the fraud within departments. But
Sure.
Part of the issue is they're watchdogs too. And that's part of the reason why you want to put that protection in there as well, because if they are doing their job and if they literally spot fraud, you don't want somebody immediately canceling and silencing them before they can get their story out about the fraud. So I think that's part of what the rationale is. But this is kind of, I guess, some of the sticky stuff about going in here and whacking away. I mean, I certainly am all for it. Getting rid of a lot of these things that we may not need, and clearly they're, I mean, we see the waste everywhere in government. So as far as that part of these inspector general jobs, I don't know exactly what they're doing. But as far as their watchdog authority, if they see issues of fraud and all that, I mean that. I guess it would be interesting to hear all the different cases these guys may have brought in over time, but that is something that, I guess you would like to see that the statute means something, I guess, because otherwise we are running into, I guess, constitutional problems if the statute literally means nothing and we can just override it. So,
well, let me ask something then. How many times have you heard about an inspector general brought something to light and somebody got prosecuted, somebody got some fraud was discovered, and Congress took action? How many times have you ever heard that happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. Maybe the news media just doesn't care about it, or they're not doing anything. I don't know.
I think if you go back 20 years, you'll probably find one, maybe two cases if you're lucky. Quite frankly.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know what these people do. These people call themselves inspector generals. I don't know. I don't know what they do. I really don't know.
Well,
I don't know what is this job that they are doing that makes them so valuable.
Well, and maybe this is where we need to get into some of the other stories, because what are they doing might be the question with some of these other stories. So there is one of the initial things that they're going to be cutting right away that Doge found was that the White House was spending $50 million to send condoms to Gaza. This is literally one of the first things that has met the axe in the Trump administration. And we actually have a short video of that. It is KOL2. James, can you play that real quick?
There's also a freeze on hiring, as you know, a regulatory freeze, and there's also a freeze on foreign aid. And this is, again, incredibly important to ensure that this administration is taking into consideration how hard the American people are working. And their tax dollars actually matter to this administration. Just during this pause, Doge and OMB have actually found that there was $37 million that was about to go out the door to the World Health Organization, which is an organization, as you all know, that President Trump, with the swipe of his pen in that executive order, is no longer wants the United States to be a part of. So that wouldn't be in line with the president's agenda. Doge and OMB also found that there was about to be 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza. That is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money.
So condoms to Gaza. And one of the things that I guess I've heard, and James, maybe you could bring up the visual here. The Times of Israel has this story, and it shows some guys who look like they, kind of, it looked like some of the guys who might have been involved in October 6th, maybe, I don't know. But and they've got all of these condoms blown up with helium, apparently. And apparently one of the claims is that they may be using these condoms to send over incendiaries toward Israel.
Yes.
So, I mean, but I mean, the whole point is if that's what they're going to do in that part of the world, why are we sending $50 million condoms to help in this? I can't even imagine, how this all happens. But anyways, I mean, this is one of the things, right? I mean, for better or worse, we're seeing some, maybe some, Trump coming out like a bull in a china shop. But I mean, right away, why was this not a story before?
Indeed.
What do you guys think about this?
Take notice, please. Take notice, please. No inspector general highlighted this thing. This was only highlighted through Doge. Okay? So even though we have these inspector generals doing all these fancy work, supposedly this work that is so important, that thing was going to get past an inspector general who was supposed to be looking for waste, fraud, and abuse, and they never saw it. Okay? Doge found it. So what is the point of these inspector generals? And why should we as taxpayers be sending money to Gaza so they can make bombs, with condoms, and could go bomb one of our allies?
And by the way, let me break in real quick here. If you're watching us on public access and you want to hear about more of the crazy stuff we're going to talk about government cuts and spending, you're going to have to catch the rest of that conversation online where the show exists at knuckleheadsofliberty.com. So go check that out. Back to the show, Leon. Go ahead.
Yes. So why? I mean, some of this foreign aid that we are seeing here is downright ridiculous. When you look at where this money ends up. I mean, if you want to look at some real government efficiency, look at foreign aid. It is horrendous in terms of the kind of things that our tax dollars end up funding. And so more power to them. If Doge could find these things and root them out, I'll be so happy. So I have no sympathy for these inspector generals who got fired. If God help them, they'll get new jobs and they'll go find a life to do something worthwhile. But what they're doing within government is nothing. End of story.
Well, this is an example of government spending. Yeah, even though it's in today's day and age, it's just chicken feed. Unfortunately, $50 million is just nothing to the government. But it's an example of spending, not regulations. Okay, so it's not like, even though the American taxpayer is paying for it, it's not a regulation to saddle you with something you have to do to whatever you're trying to do. They want to regulate everything we do nowadays. So anyway, it's not that. So this is an example, this condom thing of government overspending, and yeah, definitely aid to foreign nations, Israel, and Ukraine and all these other things. So yeah, we've got, and David Stockman has gone into basically wrote a book outlining what has to be done to cut the government spending by $2 trillion, and he makes it extremely clear. And so Trump needs to look in that area. And I don't know if the $50 million condoms is on it, but definitely, it's a good thing to get rid of it.
Well, Tim,
We'll see.
you make a good point in the fact that it's spending and not necessarily a case of fraud. But James, maybe you can bring back up the picture again, though, because here's the thing, right? I mean, I think if they were giving away condoms, the idea would have been, if they were to be weapons of some kind of destruction, it would have been in the bedroom, right? not with terrorists using them as weapons to potentially attack Israel with, which I would think, that would be the job of an inspector general, to figure out if the money was being used by the executive agencies the way it's supposed to be used, right? And I mean, if this clearly is not, I can't imagine that our government said, yes, we are intending to send these over to be used as weapons against Israel. These $50 million in condoms, right?
Yeah, I'm amazed that that's even constitutional, that they can send them over for their intended use of having sex without exchanging bodily fluids. They even that. I mean, it may be high on the list of wonderful things to do for the Gazans. I don't know, but that's not constitutional. Where in the Constitution does it tell us that the federal government they have the power to give condoms to other nations, any nations, that they can steal money from us and use that and this kind of stuff. And the same goes for 500-pound bombs, but that's another story.
So you think foreign aid is unconstitutional, Tim?
All of it is, but I think I don't know what, honestly, I don't know what is and is not. As far as foreign aid, what type of foreign aid is constitutional and what's not. Certainly, we are a nation because France gave foreign aid to us in the forms of arms and supplies and ammunition in our Revolutionary War against England. Okay, so without that, we would never have become a nation. So maybe foreign aid is necessary here or there. I don't know, but I would really look carefully at it. And with a country $36 trillion in debt, 50 million or 50,000 or $50 worth of condoms is not on the table anymore. Just not on the table.
Well, I don't think the whole issue is that by stopping 50 million from getting to Gaza, I don't think is considered a big deal. It is not. The issue is these are the kind of things that we are seeing throughout government. So it might be a 50 million here, it might be a 75 million there, it might be a 10 million someplace else. Before you know it, we're talking about real money. This is where it all starts, is looking at all of these items within all of these three-letter agencies we have, spending money here, there, and everywhere, like drunken sailors. And that is not their money, it's our money, it's our tax dollars that we work for and give to the government to be good stewards of, which they are not. So it might only be $50 million, you're right. In a $4 trillion budget, it's next to nothing. But the fact of the matter is, we have to start a 50 million, a 25 million, a 10 million, and on and on. And these are the building blocks to really cut this bloated government that we call the United States government.
You haven't read David Stockman's stuff on it, have you?
No, I have not.
Okay. Let's go. What's next?
So, no, whoa. What was the point of that?
Oh, it's it's the fat, the muscle, and the bone. Okay, it's what has to be cut. If we have a prayer of saving the economic ability of this nation, and it's spelled out succinctly, and even though he's going to make a small book out of it, which is the way I think I'm going to read everything on it, so I can start from point A and go to point B. And point A is the fat. It's he doesn't, anyway, yeah, and it is all this stuff that you're talking about, but there's huge amounts in the spending of the federal government, and those have to be cut a lot. And nobody's going to want to. Jason, you're muted.
Well, and this is just the point, I guess, that if let's say those inspector generals are even trying to do their job as far as finding, waste, I guess, that part of what Doge is after, right? Clearly, they're not doing that great of a job if they didn't catch this particular thing, right? When at least a media organization caught it, right? Because I've got a picture of it that we're seeing, and so this is something that I guess, how can we even hope as individuals if we have inspector generals who are paid to watch government and specific agencies and other things to catch waste? Think of how big government is and all of the different agencies government has and all of the different, statutes and regulations there are combined. It's just nobody could ever read that in their whole lifetime, probably. And especially since there's always changes coming out every year as well. So
Yeah,
the
Leon
idea
wants to change all of them every
No, Tim, no.
you're gonna be
That's
busy,
not
Leon.
what I said. I think every law should have a date of date of sunrise, and it should have a date of sunset, and the time between those things should be about 10, 12 years, something like that.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I said.
Okay.
But I guess the point I was trying to make on this is just simply that individuals can't hope to follow this stuff. Inspector generals can't hope to follow this stuff. Doge may be looking at it right now while there's all this attention, but as Doge goes on for several years, if it continues indefinitely, it's eventually going to fall into the same pattern as these inspector generals, right? Because that's where the incentives are. This is part of the problem, right? Is that I think what we're hoping with Doge is that it won't be just simply look for efficiency and don't spend this little amount of money here, don't spend that. Simply eliminate things that government does, right? If we can change that mindset to say, hey, look, there's no reason for government, say, to have a Department of Education at the federal level, right? I mean, what's the point of sending all the money to the feds, sending it back to the states with federal strings attached on how you have to educate your kids? And look at the product we're getting out of this. I mean, my gosh, we talked about a district in Baltimore where 13 schools and not one kid was math literate, right? And I mean, what the hell kind of results are we getting out of this? And it's only been around since the 70s. It's like the war on poverty. Poverty ain't losing, right?
Poverty won that war. Definitely, poverty won that war.
Yeah,
and drugs won the drug war.
Yeah,
and the terrorists won the war on terror.
Yeah.
So no matter, and you can be sure of this: whatever entity the United States federal government declares war on, they're going to be the victor. The entity is going to be the victor, and the United States government is going to be the loser. You can just if history be our guide.
Well, and that was my point with the Department of Education. It's not an issue of saying, hey, is there a way we can make the Department of Education more efficient? Because that's a losing battle over time. It's just simply a matter of get rid of it, right? And then there's less chances for inefficiency. If the government doesn't really need to be doing something, just get rid of government there. And then, now we may not be able to get rid of government everywhere, but at least for those places that we can identify where we can get rid of it, we should, because it's just going to be 36 trillion in debt, right? I mean, that's where we're at, right? So this isn't getting any prettier.
It's getting a lot worse.
Yeah.
So. And the litmus test for all this is going to be after a full fiscal year goes by with Trump pulling the strings and running the show. And if we're still going into debt at the rates that we are right now, you can just chalk everything up as a big loser. Okay. So we'll see, because it's all going to be very, very evident in how quickly our debt climbs.
Well, and this leads us to the next story that so one of the first things Trump did, and he seems to be getting in a little bit of trouble with the courts on this, but I think there's a lot of support for what he's doing here too, is he immediately froze all of the government grants that the government sends out to NGOs and all these other things, so that they can be re-reviewed by his administration. So James, maybe you could bring up the visual on this. Trump aid freeze stirs chaos before it is blocked by the courts. So there's been a temporary hold on this, but we do have a video story real quick of this. And so, James, maybe you could play KOL 3 to give people a little bit of background on it.
Trump signed an executive order issuing a federal funding freeze, saying it's needed to make sure programs don't run counter to President Trump's agenda.
So there will be no more federal funding for DEI programs. There will be no more federal funding for the Green New Deal, which is an order from the previous administration that President Trump has rescinded.
The broad directive has caused confusion throughout massive federal programs like Medicaid, which provides health insurance for 72 million low-income Americans. Experts say the freeze is clearly illegal. Within minutes, a federal judge temporarily blocking the order from going into effect. More than 22 states, plus Washington, D.C., have filed a lawsuit against the administration. Federal grants and loans reach into virtually every corner of Americans' lives, with hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into education, healthcare, disaster relief, infrastructure, and a host of other initiatives.
So you can see, I mean, again, Trump not sleeping on the job. Week one, there's a lot of activity happening, and it's stirring a lot of feathers. And this is something that, probably, as that news story indicated, probably affects a lot of different places, because government is in a lot of areas of your life. Yeah. But anyways, this is something where, it's being challenged. And what do you guys think about it? I mean, is it good to just throw a freeze in there? Should we be allowing these things to go on kind of the way we've been going? I mean, to me, one of the things I at least like about this is Trump is really doing something as he comes in. He's not just the status quo this time. Anyways, what do you guys think?
Does anybody know, if you stopped every one of those things, completely eliminated them, how much would it save? In other words, how much is being spent every year on those things by the federal government?
I don't know, but I think we're going to find out.
Yeah, I don't have a figure on it, but
okay. So that my first thought is, I don't know how much of a dent this is going to do. I don't know if it's an ant or a dinosaur. I just don't know. And so, at this point in time, I am going to do a wait and see. It's certainly not as important and as good for the bottom line of the federal government as renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. I mean, that's the number one cost of the federal government right there, having Gulf of Mexico named Gulf of Mexico.
Why would that be a cost? What would that cost us at all?
That's my point. It wouldn't, and I'm just making fun of it. I just think it's the dumbest thing I've heard, and I don't know how.
I'm sure the government can figure out a way to make that costly.
Well, maybe they can. We know.
Well, it'll be costly now to change all the maps and charts and everything else.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Liam.
Well. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America things notwithstanding, I mean, this thing, these lawsuits that are being filed in the name of the people to try and make sure that people get what they quote unquote need. This shows the very problem within our society. Bloated government have turned our society in a society of victim and dependence. We are all dependent on the government. Oh my God, they're going to cut my Social Security. Oh my God, they're going to cut my Medicare. Oh my God, they're going to cut my Medicaid. And on it goes. But the whole issue is dependency. And this is what we have become here. So now we have judges now trying to get in on the good times and say, oh, no, it's unconstitutional to do that. When I'm sure there's no way in the Constitution, getting back to Tim's point, there's no way in the Constitution that supports some of these programs. None whatsoever.
Well, this does beg the question, though. I mean, if and this is a little more of a question for Tim than Leon, but because I know we both have a big respect for Ron Paul, but when Ron Paul, I mean, that's probably the closest thing to a libertarian, I guess, really trying to win the presidency, in a serious way that we've had. And one of the things Ron Paul said was that, well, if I were to become president, the first thing I would do is to recall all the military and bring them back, and that's where I'd make my cuts as an executive. And so then we could, essentially reprioritize, kind of like maybe what Trump is doing here. I don't know. It just not with our war machine, and then by cutting that area, he felt like, well, money could be repurposed then to shore up our social safety net, while we tried to trim that back over time as well too. But so I mean, it does bring up the question. I mean, as for libertarians, what would we want if somebody came in to power? Because it seems to me that Trump, in some ways, may be doing some of the things that we might want as a libertarian, in the sense of, hey, wait, let's stop, let's freeze that money, let's see what's happening here, let's maybe pull this back, let's hold on a second. I don't know. I mean, that in some ways that was kind of keeping in line with what Ron Paul was saying, and although I'd like to see Trump do it a little more with the military. So, what do you think?
Am I more qualified because I'm more of a Ron Paul type guy, or?
Well, I just thought that you'd favored Ron Paul quite a bit, so I figured you might have some thoughts on it.
Oh, yeah, but not only that, but and he was correct in trying to trim back the hegemony of the United States government, putting itself into the role of never mind what military we need in order to protect our own interests. I just heard about a general. This was years back when they were trying to expand the military to be able to go everywhere, like all these bases, and have all these aircraft carriers and everything. He said, "I can." And I don't know the exact quote, but to the effect, "I can protect the United States for whatever it was, 300 billion or something." He goes, "But if you want me to go here, there, and everywhere and be the world's policeman, it's going to cost you a lot more." And so that's what Ron Paul was talking about. And that's what has to be done if we're ever going to have a prayer of bringing the spending down to the point where we can actually afford it. So we're going to have to just defend the United States and not go off all over the place.
Sure, I get that, Tim, but how is that fundamentally different than maybe Trump trying to stop a lot of other federal spending and at least freeze it or pull it back for repurposing? Because to me, it seems like there's a parallel there with what Ron Paul was talking about. And I know both me and you thought that was a great idea when Ron Paul was talking about it, at least with respect to the military. So
I think the difference is the order of magnitude between military spending and these other little, nitpicky little things here and there. Whoa, kitty. Whoa. Oh, sorry. Kitty got a nail on me here. So I don't think that, unless Trump's going to go after the military, he's got a prayer to do any of this stuff that he's talking about doing as far as cutting costs.
Well, just for context here, Tim,
okay,
the military budget is about $800-900 billion. All right, we have a total of about $4 trillion budget. Okay, so where the rest of that money is all elsewhere, foreign aid, domestic spending, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think the military is the issue. Of sure, within the military industrial complex, there are certain things that we must go after, we must cut. And I think Trump had made that very clear. I mean, look at the person he put in charge of the Pentagon right now. So I think this fixation on the military is I mean, sure, there are places that we could cut, but that's not the big problem, quite frankly.
Well, you have a lot of people that disagree with you.
Well, I'm
And
talking numbers. Put the numbers. I am telling you, is $800 to $900 billion
okay,
is the military.
are you including all the people that get fixed up because they come back with legs blown off and all that kind of stuff? Are you talking about
We have a department for that. We have
spending?
the Veterans of Foreign Affairs. That's not part of the military budget.
Okay, but it's a result of military affairs overseas.
Okay.
And it's one of the biggest costs of having a military. Okay, so Leon, you can say, okay, we're going to go on vacation. We're going to go on a spelunking vacation, and if we get injured, we're not going to count that as the cost of the vacation. If we fall down and break both our legs while we're spelunking, we're just going to say, well, how much was the flight to the place, and what was the hotel and the Jeep ride and all that? And how much was the climbing gear? No, you have to include, if you're really going to look at it honestly, what happened as a result of the vacation spelunking. And that's the problem with the military. They come back with all these people with their legs blown off and their arms blown off. And now what are you going to do? And PTSD and who knows what else, that's got to be in the equation. If it's not in the equation, you're not being honest about the problem.
Okay. So then let us say the Veterans Affairs plus the military. Okay, plus the military budget, the actual direct military budget. That is that should be the target. Fine. Correct. Let's say that.
Yeah.
You still if you take those two departments, the Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs, you still not talking about the majority of the budget.
Okay.
Well, I guess.
I think we have a difference of numbers. I've heard that $800 billion thing, which, by the way, that was what David Stockman used to compare to, and this was making the dollars exactly the same, adjusted for inflation. So, under Eisenhower, his thing was about a $400 to $500 billion expenditure for the military, and adjusted. So now his was just protect the United States. It was heavy on intercontinental ballistic missiles, so they had the whole mutually assured destruction to protect us, and a lot of submarines and stuff like that. Now we've got all these aircraft carriers to support all these invasions and occupations and stuff. And so that stuff, the jump between 400 billion and 800 billion is the area where, although it doesn't sound like much, when you protract it out with all the costs of going to these other foreign countries and getting blown up, it's a major cost. So I'll have to revisit some of those numbers, and I'll see what I can come up with.
Well, let me transition this to another story that also come out of all of this. It's kind of cross between these two in cutting spending and some military issues as well. But one of the issues as well with the appointment of Pete Hegseth is that now they've said, hey, look, there's going to be no more DEI funding in the military. So we're not going to be funding, any kind of social engineering, I guess, beyond what it takes to be a soldier, I guess, in the military. And so that is one of the new things, and they're also cutting a lot of funding for DEI that goes out into other places too, I guess, with some of that freeze-in funding as well. But one of the things that happened with that, and this is where maybe it's important of how exactly these things are phrased and written, is that, and James, maybe you could bring up the visual, but apparently there are some who maybe are trying to keep with the spirit of the law, or maybe trying to maliciously bend the spirit to maybe make hay of some of these edicts to stop the DEI and other things. But somebody took that to mean that they couldn't talk about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, and I guess that was part of one of their training courses or something, is to let people know about that incident. And the Tuskegee Airmen essentially were a black unit in the military. It was a fairly large amount of soldiers, and they were being experimented on by our government secretly, without the government telling them, and do pretty heinous stuff. I guess it wouldn't surprise many libertarians, but it should surprise everybody else who has a lot of faith in the government here. But this is something where, immediately Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration said, no, that's not what we're talking about. You can teach the course on the Tuskegee Airmen still within the military. But this does kind of bring up a question, right? Because clearly this is something where blacks were treated differently at a certain point in time, and it's being discussed. But if you just make a blanket edict, if you're not careful with the words, how exactly is that going to be interpreted? Because clearly I don't think we want some of this crazy DEI stuff where they're going in and essentially trying to separate everybody by their color, which is what most of these DEI programs do nowadays. But this is something talking about the Tuskegee Airmen, which is saying this is where we did it wrong in the past, and we don't want to repeat that mistake, and we want to treat everybody equally by their color. With irrespective of color, rather. So
does that mean they want to experiment on everybody, white, black? No
exactly.
I think, whoa. I think we're confusing things. Let's not confuse things, okay? There were the Tuskegee experiments, which was occurring at what is now Tuskegee University. That's one thing. And then there were the Tuskegee Airmen who fought in World War II, and they were a segregated unit of blacks. Those are the two different things. Are we conflating things here? Which one are we talking about?
Maybe I think I might be conflating it, Leon. I think maybe I got those two a little bit mixed up. But okay, so that's something.
Wondering, you got the Tuskegee Airmen over in Europe during World War II. I was wondering,
yes, they were.
Yeah, lace their food or what?
I think I need to see the course on the Tuskegee.
I think you do.
So maybe I needed to be drafted in the military for that.
Yeah, they were a highly decorated and highly successful P-51 Mustang fighter group, by the way.
Yes, they were.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess then, irrespective of the government experiment part, which I guess the government did in Vietnam, experiment on quite a few people, regardless.
Yes, that did happen. Yes,
regardless of color.
Yes.
But at least with respect to the Tuskegee Airmen, then okay, so this was a segregated unit then back in those days, and they're teaching about it, right? Is that? At what point, certainly it's part of history. So we should teach it, I suppose. But I mean, the point is, if you're going to say no DEI, where does that, if you're not careful in how you say that, where does it end, I guess?
I don't see how the history of the Tuskegee Airmen could have anything to do with DEI, quite frankly. Just because these people are black, I don't know how that have anything to do with DEI. They were just a bunch of guys who were in the military in a segregated unit, who were flying planes over Europe and had a very successful career with the military, even though they were segregated. I don't know how that becomes part of DEI. I guess this is the whole corruption that these DEI programs cause, and I will even go along with the concept of what we call malicious compliance, that these people some of these people purposely stop this program to say, there's Trump, the racist, there he is, he wants us to stop teaching black history, blah, 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 and all this other damn nonsense they always speak about. So I don't know that if there's any way, I'm sure there's no way in Trump's executive order in trying to end DEI throughout the federal government. I don't think there was anything in the order that talk about banning the teaching of black history or any kind of history. I don't know why this was the one that they chose to stop. They didn't stop any other one. They didn't stop teaching about the Abraham tank and the success in Europe or anything like that. They didn't stop any of that. But all of a sudden they say, well, we have to stop the Tuskegee Airmen, or teaching about the Tuskegee Airmen. Oh my God. And it just coincidentally happened that these people were black.
Yeah,
you can't see the viciousness about that's going on here. These people trying to undermine what Trump is trying to do. So we have this malicious compliance of his executive order.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what it sounds like to me as well.
Sure, very good. Thank you.
It does bring up the point, though, that if you have a government entity, if you have a private entity, I don't care what they teach, right? I mean, they can teach whatever kind of history they want. When you start getting into government entities, and if you say, well, I'm going to teach Black history, then okay, well, do you also have a segment on Asian history, right? Do you have a history? You know, if you make the decision to teach one and not the other, even is that a problem, right? And this is, I guess, part of the reason why, as a libertarian, I want to minimize government doing any of this stuff, because when government is doing any of it, then there's a question, well, are they giving more attention to this group than that group, and everything else, right? And you get it once you say it's private and it's your own decision, then who cares, right? But as we have government here, and you can make an argument, well, this is the military and it's about military history, so okay, you gotta teach what you gotta teach, I guess. But it does beg the question. I mean, where does that fall in the importance of things to teach as well, right? I mean, if you're a soldier going into the military, should there be a course on Black history in the military? I don't know.
No. I want, and this is what I think the new administration is aiming for, is that we are going to teach significant points or significant events or significant phenomena in our history. Okay. Now, some of those things, like D-Day, was not in any way had any time with our social issues that were going on at the time. We invaded we dropped on the beach of Normandy, and we went there and we accomplished a great thing. Fine. Another significant thing that happened was the Tuskegee Airmen. That is a significant thing. Okay. And what is significant about it, obviously, is their success, and also the fact they were working in segregated units. I see nothing wrong in teaching that as history. But it's when we get into where we are even segregating our language and our thoughts by race in teaching things in history, then we develop this problem. This is where critical race theory comes in, and we start to talk about all this damn nonsense. So if we are teaching things as history, even though it may involve a segregated Black unit, I don't see that as a problem. But it becomes a problem when we start to make history part of our social dynamic, shall we say, and then trying to transfer that into the social dynamics of today, right? Where we're trying to make today sound like it was during World War II and all this damn nonsense. So I know there's a fine line I'm trying to draw here, but I think it could be done if we treat things as they are. It is history. It was Black airmen working in a segregated unit that had great success in World War II. That I find should be taught, not because they were Black, but because of their valor in war. These are the kind of things I think we should be focusing on, not the fact of their race. Of course, their race ended up causing them to end up in a segregated unit. But the fact of the matter is, it was a significant event. It was a significant event in our military history.
So teach it just as history.
As history, period.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, that certainly sounds like a good plan. But speaking of other things that Trump has been busy at as well, and Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual here. So he has wasted no time in getting us once again out of the Paris Climate Accords. So before I think it got out of Kyoto, I think the first time around, and this time.
No, he got out of the Paris Accords the first time around too.
Oh, is the Paris Accords the first time too? Okay,
yeah.
It's been a big gap in time, but essentially these are the World Climate Agreements, where apparently the United States is the only one that has obligations. Everybody else's obligation is to sit and watch for the most part.
Yeah.
But this is something that Trump has immediately pulled us out of, and it's significant. And it goes back to that point where you saw the new press secretary talk about ending the Green New Deal stuff. And once again, this is something that it's certainly significant. So do you guys have any thoughts on Trump pulling us out of the Paris Climate Accords?
Yeah, good. That's all. One word, good.
Okay. Well, Jason, you're known since I've known you, which is probably, I don't know, 10 years now, maybe more. I'm not even sure how long it's been. I always thought all of this climate stuff, all this renewable stuff, all of that stuff is nothing but a big scam, a big hoax. You know that's my feeling about it. And there was that 1982 segment on CBS News with Dan Rather talking about all of these catastrophic things that were about to happen. These experts, including Al Gore, was telling us of all of these terrible things that was going to happen to us. Oh my God, we got to take cover and spend all this government money and institute all this Marxist crap to save ourselves. What have happened now? This was in 1982 that Dan Rather and Al Gore was talking about these things. What have happened since then? Where are we? Is it half of Florida under the ocean? Where is that? Or did we move all our food in, which was claimed in the segment on CBS News? Did we move all of our farming production, the food production? Did we move it to Canada? Where are we now? But this is what happens. AOC came out with a green New Deal. Well, Trump administration referred to it as a Green New Scam, which it is. And she said we only had 12 years. Okay, after about 2 years and nothing was happening, she said, "All can't take a joke." That's what she said. All can't take a joke.
And she was getting close to that. Well, right? Aren't we about 8 years into that?
Yeah, we're about 8 years into it now. What have happened? I'm still waiting. On the cover of Time magazine, I think, it was Time magazine or Newsweek, one of them, in 1974. You know what they were talking about? April 1974. You know what they're talking about? They were talking about the coming ice age. We got to prepare for it. This was in 1974. And here we are in 2024. And where's that ice age? No. The ice age have disappeared. And you know what come about now? We have climate change with the earth warming. My God, please help us from these experts.
Well, I think one thing that at least COVID should have made clear to all of us is that when somebody claims the authority of the scientific consensus, we all need to have a little bit more skepticism about it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be wrong on everything, but it is something where, I think that card has been overused and overplayed. We clearly saw, my gosh, in COVID, how many times did the consensus tell us, don't wear masks, do wear masks,
yes,
wear
yes.
2 masks, wear 3 masks, just one thing after another. They told us that that it couldn't have come from a science lab. Now the consensus is shifting to, it most likely did come from a lab, but they would have canceled you about talking about it back then. So this is just, kind of where we are. And I think we need to, maybe it's worth at least taking our breath and stepping back and at least seeing if this stuff makes sense, because clearly we saw that a lot of stuff in the fast speed of the COVID stuff didn't make a lot of sense afterwards in hindsight. So, but speaking of the science credibility,
before we go, let me just add one thing here, okay? Anytime you hear about scientific consensus, that should be a first red flag. Science, up until about the last 10 years, science is never made by consensus. When Newton came up with all his laws of calculus and everything, you think he went around asking 97% of the mathematicians who was alive in his time to ask him, what do you think about this? Oh, do we have a consensus here? Then I'll put it out. Huh? Do you think that's what happened? Or when Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, do you think he went around to get a consensus about it? Anytime you see consensus where science is concerned, that should be a first red flag.
How about Galileo?
Okay, Galileo. Yeah, there we go. We could go back further.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And back then, I think the consensus was that if you didn't follow along with what the Catholic Church told you, you might be in trouble.
they might
That
burn
was
you
a
at the stake.
consensus.
Did he used to do that?
Well, Copernicus found that out, I think, the hard way,
Yes.
Yeah.
but Galileo evaded the stake, but he didn't evade home imprisonment for much of the later years of his life, I think. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
House
but
arrest. Yes.
yeah, but this
Have
is
you
something.
read? If you want to read some really good stuff, you should read some of the letters he wrote to the Catholic Church, or some of his testimony in front of the Catholic Church. It's just so awesome. The guy was so much smarter than everybody else. But anyway,
Well, and it was funny too, because it's just a little digression, but when Galileo, I guess, published these arguments in a book, and he published it in the common language so that everybody could read it, and they didn't need their priest to read it to them, which
Yeah.
was a common thing. And so when he wrote it, he wrote the arguments of the church that the earth was the center of the universe, that the person speaking those arguments' name was Simplicio. And then, of course, he was, anybody could reading it could see that they were wrong on everything, which
Yes.
was what I guess enraged the church, and it's kind of probably a small miracle that Galileo wasn't burned at the stake.
yeah, probably was.
So, anyways, but it just goes to show you that there are incentives, and I believe in order to get the House imprisonment, I think Galileo had to recant, I think, too, on some of that stuff,
He did,
which kind
yeah.
of shows you
Yes.
the pressure of government on a scientist if you're not going along with the program.
That's what it
Really?
is. It's his recanting that was so brilliantly written.
Mhm.
That's the part. It's
Yeah.
just hilarious and brilliant at the same time. Anyway,
Yeah.
I got to read it now.
Well, speaking of the science, one of the guys who, with COVID at least, that was, tried to take on the mantle of the consensus was Tony Fauci. And so there was a recent story where one of the first things Trump did, I guess, was to take away his security detail. So now, if you recall, Biden on his final days coming out of office, he gave Fauci a pardon, a preemptive pardon, so that
Yes.
Fauci, who was at the heart of all of these decisions around COVID, around the research that went into most likely the spread of COVID in the first place. We don't know a lot of these things because it's been suppressed. And one of the key guys right at the heart of that, trying to suppress other scientists who were looking into this, was Tony Fauci. In fact, Jay Bhattacharya, who's going to have a significant role, I think, in the Trump administration. He
Yes.
was. There were emails going back between Fauci and Collins saying that we've got to have a dramatic takedown of this guy.
Sure. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, anyways, but it appears that there may be a price tag associated with this preemptive pardon. So now he's not going to wind up having the security he thought he was going to have. In fact, there is a little video that we have on Trump speaking about this, which is, take it for what it is. But this is KOL 5. James, maybe you could play that.
Security detail for Anthony Fauci was terminated last night, sir. Do you have a comment?
No, I think, when you work for government, at some point your security detail comes off. And, you can't have them forever. They all made a lot of money. They can hire their own security, too. All the people you're talking about, they can go out. I can give them some good numbers of very good security people. They can hire their own security. They all made a lot of money. Fauci made a lot of money. They all did. So if they, felt that strongly, I think that certainly I would not take responsibility.
And, this is almost goes back to the Inspector General's stuff that we talked about before. I guess it's the law, but doesn't it raise any eyebrows that somebody like Fauci can be in government, be recommending that everybody take a vaccine and then actually profit off of that vaccine as well? And Fauci, that's what Trump was referring to when he said he made a lot of money while he was there. So this is, absolutely, yeah. Anyways, I as far as I'm concerned, karma.
I
So
hope
what do you guys think?
I hope and pray that that man is prosecuted. I know we have this quote unquote preemptive pardon. I play a lawyer on TV, but I believe those preemptive pardons are unconstitutional. So I want him to go to court and assert that he has a pardon and he cannot be sentenced as a result. I hope he's prosecuted and sentenced, and he's going to claim that he cannot be sentenced. But then let them, the Trump administration, challenge that all the way to the Supreme Court, because I believe those preemptive pardons are unconstitutional. I really do believe that. And I really hope and pray that Anthony Fauci ends his days in a prison somewhere in the United States. Or they could send him to Gitmo too. That'll be okay with me.
Well, I hope nothing happens to him because of a lack of security detail. But like was said by Trump, that he could probably afford his own. So now the taxpayers of the United States do not have to fund the security details of uber wealthy people anymore. I guess a few of them at least. So maybe that's a good thing. Their waste, fraud, and abuse. Maybe it's wasteful to fund the security efforts of a multi-bazillionaire or whatever they are.
And it does raise the question too. I mean, I guess if you are working for the government and somehow you're working on something that's sensitive with terrorists or something like that, maybe there's an argument that some sort of government protection maybe should be granted you. But this guy supposedly wasn't doing that, and he's also got a preemptive pardon where he doesn't have to tell us anything that he was doing at this point, I guess, although he might be compelled, I guess, if Congress brings it up, because technically he can't be prosecuted for anything in the past, but he could still be, forced to tell about it, I guess.
Well, just to be clear, technically he could still be prosecuted. Is that no judge could sentence him? That's what a pardon is. You could not, or a preemptive pardon, you cannot be sentenced, but you could still be prosecuted. So you could go all the way through the trial and everything and that kind of stuff and things like that. And when the judge says it's time to sentence you to 50 gazillion years in prison, he will say, well, I have a preemptive pardon. You can't do that. That's when it becomes a constitutional issue.
I have a preemptive pardon, but no security. Preemptive pardon that says I might be complicit in potentially the deaths of millions of people. So, I don't know.
Just to be clear, before I ran on, Richard Nixon also got a preemptive pardon, but nobody challenged it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think with Richard Nixon, I think it was kind of understood that it was tied mostly to the Watergate, even though it didn't quite specify that. I guess, Leon, you were saying the other day it was mainly for anything during his term as president, I guess. Yes. So, yes. But I think everybody realizes it was the stuff tied around Watergate that was of concern. But anyways, so we're about that point in the show. We've talked about a lot of the stuff Trump has done, but we do have our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, and our Knucklehead Noise Patrol this time, it's not so much what Trump is doing on the federal level, but it has to do with the fires that we talked about a few weeks ago in Los Angeles. And he was down there recently, and it was very interesting to see him engage with Karen Bass because she's the mayor who's in charge of this, and of course Governor Newsom is also has a hand in all this as well. But Trump attended a press conference, and they got into an exchange about the timing, I guess, of how long it would take to get, I guess, for government to get on the job and get people back into their homes. And so that's kind of what all this is about. But the first thing I want to show you is a little news clip about what the issue of the timing is all about. So this is sort of a local Fox News station talking about one family that lost their home and the amount of time that they're worried it's going to take to get back, and some of Karen Bass's answers. So James, can you play KNP number 1?
The city is still telling people that the toxins are in the air and in the rubble, so it is not safe to be up here for long. Still, for the very first time in weeks, we're actually seeing traffic on Sunset Boulevard.
It's devastating,
For the first time since the fire, the Williams family and others were allowed to return to the rubble of their Palisades home.
5 generations of memories.
They're flooded with memories and questions.
Where do you even start?
For Mayor Karen Bass about when they can clear debris.
We can't move forward until our properties are cleaned.
That first needs to be inspected for toxic materials.
I want them to just be truthful. If they honestly think it's going to be 18 months, then tell me it's going to be 18 months.
We just talked to some homeowners who are frustrated because they say, is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 18 months? We just want a straight answer.
A couple of things that we're doing to really help speed it up is to get people to go to the Disaster Recovery Center now, next week or the week after when we open up the One Stop, so they can begin all of that paperwork now.
That was the mayor's response initially, but on a walk with the press through the burn area and after pressure for more specific timeline.
Mayor, people are still asking how long this inspection process will take with EPA.
She gave a different answer.
It would be nice if we could say by here it will be done, but that's why they have given us a range, and the range is from several weeks to 3 to 4 months.
So there you have, even just in that one interview, they had her contradicting herself. But I wanted to show that is sort of the backdrop of this issue, because Trump was at a press conference with Karen Bass, and they got into it on the timing with people who were there too, shouting the numbers, and some people were shouting 6 months, 18 months, and Karen Bass again gave a different answer. And this kind of goes to the point of how inefficient government could cause a lot of problems in our lives, and also Trump's answers were a little bit potentially concerning as well. So let's take a look at the KNP2, James. This is the first clip from the press conference.
Well, yes, but you know that you will be able to go back soon.
Mr. President.
We think within a week.
That's a long time, a week. I'll be honest. To me, everyone's standing in front of their house. They want to go to work, and they're not allowed to do it.
And the most important thing is for people
to
be safe.
They're safe. They're safe. You know what? They're not safe. They're not safe now. They're going to be much safer. A week is actually a long time, the way I look at it. I watched hundreds of people standing in front of their lots, and they're not allowed to go in. It's all burned. It's gone. It's done. Nothing's going to happen to it. It's not going to burn anymore. There's nothing to burn. There's almost nothing to burn. And they want to go in. The people are all over the place. They're standing, and I say, why aren't you going in? We're trying to get a permit. And the permit's going to take them, everybody said 18 months. You said 18 months. You said 18 months.
Last night.
I think I might add another clip too, but I guess I got it out of order. But I think that kind of shows. There she's saying a week, right, in that press conference. And a lot of other people had concerns. This was 18 months. And, and so certainly Karen Bass looks like, yet another government official who is kind of jerking people around on timetables and doesn't really know what it is and just giving people answers. But so certainly that's the biggest, I guess, part of this Knucklehead Noise Patrol is her response. But also the other thing, and I guess we didn't get it in the other part of Trump's response, but Trump was also telling people that they could probably just go in and do it themselves and start pulling this stuff themselves. And James, maybe you could pull up the visual here. But I mean, this is potentially a problem as well, because as that one news report said, there's all kinds of toxic mess going around in here too, in all of this mess. And so, do you really want to say that people can just start sifting through this? And one of the things contributing to the toxic mess, believe it or not, is the number of EVs in Los Angeles. So there were so many EVs, and all of these EVs that caught on fire and were burned. There's questions about the toxic materials from the batteries that wound up going down in all these certainly it's one of these issues where firefighters are having to set new protocols and how they deal with EV fires, because you can't put them out nearly as fast, and they burn hotter and longer than a lot of regular cars or gasoline powered cars do. But this is now a thing where, because these things have all been mandated and incentivized by the government, suddenly we may have some other issues going on here with the cleanup, and maybe how long it's going to take. And one of the things Karen Bass said in a part of that press conference too, that I missed the clip on, I guess, but she also talked about wanting to hurry up and try and get some of the stuff cleaned up before the rains come. And, if there's mercury and other things like that coming out of these batteries, it's a lot of stuff to get into the ground there, there in Los Angeles. So, so I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think about all this? Because it sounds to me just like government kind of sort of incentivized a lot of problems, incentivized problems that could lead to toxic waste here. They also were supposed to do things like clearing brush to stop these fires in the first place. They didn't do a good job of that. They were supposed to have these water reservoirs working, and they had one that was empty for a year because of a torn cover that apparently takes a year to repair by the government. So, I mean, just a million different things about efficiency here, and nobody seems to know what they're doing. To me, this is, kind of just a disastrous story for government all around. What do you guys think about this?
And they want us to all drive electric cars, all of us. They get they want to get totally rid of the internal combustion engine, just electric, right?
That's the plan.
Okay. All right.
The thing is though, that I mean that is really a problem in Los Angeles. Okay, maybe there is some toxic stuff in and around the area, but right now in Los Angeles, they wouldn't even give people the permission to get permits to have professionals come on their property and clear the property out. This is what is taking a long time. People, it's not a matter of fact. Well, part of the problem too is that some people want to go in there and start doing it themselves. I could understand why there might be some resistance to that, but they are not allowing. At least they're not doing it timely, where they are letting people get permits where they could get a professional, maybe some environmental type, whatever, who could go in there and clean the property and decide whether it's safe or not, or blah blah blah. At least give them the option to get a permit, to get a professional to do it, rather than say that, okay, fine, you can't do it yourself, but fine, get a professional to do it. They're not even doing that. This is where Karen Bass giving you all these different answers. Oh, it's going to be a week. Oh, it's 3 months. Oh, it's this, that. We're in 18 months. This is the damn nonsense that's going on. At least give the people the ability to get professionals to go on their property and clean it out, and let them give them some certificate or whatever the hell it is to say it's safe, and then they could go back on and do what they have to do.
Yeah. Well, and this, so is reminiscent of what we saw in COVID, where people wanted to give answers, so they just gave wrong answers.
Yes.
The science, right?
Yes.
I mean, here, Karen Bass is just spitting out answers depending upon who's asking her when, and it's like, how do you have any faith or trust in that? I mean, we can literally see her saying different numbers within days of each other,
right?
And even at the same, media thing where, she was at one spot during the during the news story, and then she walked down the street in another spot, she's giving them a different answer. So, it's just absolutely nuts. But one thing too, with respect to Tim's comment on the EVs as well, and it does remind me of the Hayek quote, and I thought this might come up, so I brought this up. James, can you bring up the visual? I love this quote because these planners like Newsom and others, they always imagine that they got all these great ideas that they want to design for the public and put on them. And, Hayek really had the insight way back when. And Hayek was, the sort of the father of one of the fathers of Austrian economics. And he said, the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. And here with this EV thing, I mean, did anybody really stop to think if all of these EVs are in one place and they all burn, and if they all have materials that
all these toxic things, yes.
Yeah, is this going to be a problem? And it sounds like nobody really thought about it, right? And this is, it reminds me of by the way, you guys remember the CFL bulb mandate that we all had here in California. I don't know if it was nationwide, but I think it was at least in California. And we all had to have compact fluorescent bulbs. Okay. And these horrible little things, they are spirally little, lights that you screwed into your sockets. And, they were supposed to save the environment, is what we were told, because they would take less energy, but they had toxic materials in them.
Right.
And it turned out that a lot of these lights didn't work nearly as long as they claimed they would work. Because I've had a lot of them, and they're supposed to last like 10,000 hours or something. And, I remember my grandfather had one of the early ones, and he's telling me how it's going to last 10,000 hours. Within a few weeks, we saw smoke coming out. The base of the thing, and and I think he was a little dismayed by that. But even the later ones, they didn't last that nearly as long as they were supposed to. And then you couldn't just throw them out; you have to store them and take them to a toxic waste facility to get rid of them. And how many people are even doing that? I mean, are lots of people just throwing these things in garbage cans? Because how many people are lining up? I would think it'd have a huge line of people. I mean, I know I have two boxes of these things that I'm waiting to take. But I mean, I'm having to store this garbage, and it's toxic, and I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
I just throw them out. They go in the garbage.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
I'm not buying those light bulbs anymore, actually, but
yeah. Well, now we're all on LEDs for the most part, but the government mandated those. That was the thing. They mandated a bad decision.
That is just the problem. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just like the electric cars, mandating electric cars.
Yes. The mandate. This is just the issue. The mandate. The government touch it. The government going to touch it through the mandate. And what happens? It turns to crap. It always does. You see these wildfires that are going on in Los Angeles? It's tragic. Okay, people died. Property was lost. House burned down. Businesses burned down. All that kind of stuff. It's really tragic. But I'm telling you right now, mark my word, there are a lot more fires, quote unquote, I'm going to put it in quotes, a lot more fires, a lot more Los Angeles fires to occur in this great state of ours. Because these people who are in charge of this state are destroying it. They are deliberately destroying it with their woke garbage. And there are a lot more fires, and I put that in quote if you understand what I'm saying. There are a lot more fires to come. Okay, this was just one. There are a lot more to come. You see all these windmills we have out there? Wait, it's coming. Believe me.
Yeah. Well, so that kind of brings us to the end, but it was it's interesting to see how fast the speed of the Trump administration is going, and all of the rapid changes that we see happening. And whether you're a libertarian or not, it is a fascinating time to be watching how government is behaving during this period of time. So, hopefully next week we'll have a new guest on, but who knows? I mean, things are developing so fast with the Trump administration. There may be so many more new stories to talk about by next week. So, I guess keep your hat on and hold your liberty tight. It's going to be a wild ride, I guess. So, but until next time, think about what you can do in your community to try and promote liberty, because we all need to take a stand. You can't just hope that the Trump administration is going to do it all for you. So, try and figure out what things you can do to promote liberty in your neighborhood. Until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.